I was standing in my son's kitchen, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, when my daughter-in-law Jessica walked in with that look on her face. You know the one, where someone's about to deliver news they've been rehearsing in the mirror. She smoothed down her perfect blonde hair and gave me that smile that never quite reached her eyes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rose, we need to talk, she said, setting her designer purse on the granite countertop. Marcus and I have been discussing things, and we've realized this arrangement just isn't working anymore. We don't have space for you here. The words hit me like a physical blow. I set the teacup down with shaking hands, watching the cold liquid slosh against the porcelain. After everything I'd done for them, after giving up my own home to help with little Emma when she was born, after cooking their meals and doing their laundry for 3 years, this was how it ended. My name is Rose Mitchell, and at 72 years old, I thought I understood how family was supposed to work. I'd raised my son Marcus by myself after his father walked out when the boy was only 8. We'd struggled through lean years when I worked double shifts at the textile factory just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. Marcus had been my whole world, my pride and joy, the reason I got up every morning and kept pushing forward. When Marcus graduated from college with his engineering degree, I cried tears of pure happiness. When he landed his first job at the aerospace company, I felt like all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. And when he met Jessica at some corporate networking event, I told myself I was happy for him, even though something about her always felt calculated, like she was constantly measuring the value of everything around her. Their wedding had been a lavish affair that I couldn't afford to contribute much to, but Jessica's parents had money, and they made sure everyone knew it. I wore the same navy dress I'd worn to my sister's funeral 2 years earlier, while Jessica floated down the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. But Marcus looked so happy, so proud, that I pushed down the little voice in my head that whispered warnings I didn't want to hear. The first few years of their marriage, I kept my distance. I lived in my small apartment across town, saw them for holidays and birthdays, sent thoughtful gifts I'd carefully budgeted for. I was determined to be the kind of mother-in-law who didn't interfere, who gave them space to build their own life together. When Jessica got pregnant with Emma, I was overjoyed, but careful not to overstep. I offered help when asked and stayed quiet when I wasn't. Everything changed when Emma was born. She was the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen, with Marcus's dark eyes and a smile that could light up a room. Jessica struggled with postpartum depression, and Marcus was working long hours to afford the mortgage on their new house in Meadowbrook Heights, the kind of neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every car was less than 3 years old. That's when Jessica first asked me to move in. She was crying on the phone, telling me how overwhelmed she felt, how she couldn't manage the baby and the house and everything else. She said they needed help, that Emma needed her grandmother close by. She made it sound like I'd be doing them this enormous favor, like they were offering me a gift by letting me be part of their daily lives. I should have known better. I'd lived independently for 20 years after Marcus moved out, had my own routines, my own small circle of friends at the senior center. But the chance to be close to my granddaughter, to help my son's young family, was too tempting to resist. I sold my apartment, gave away most of my furniture, and moved into their guest room with just a few suitcases, and the hope that I was making the right choice. For the first year, it actually worked. I took care of Emma during the day while Jessica went back to work part-time at her marketing firm. I cooked dinner most nights, did the laundry, kept the house running smoothly. Emma and I developed a beautiful bond. I was the one who saw her first steps, heard her first words, comforted her when she had nightmares. Jessica seemed grateful, always thanking me for my help, telling her friends how lucky they were to have live-in childcare they could trust. But somewhere in the second year, things began to shift. Jessica started making little comments about how I did things. The way I folded the towels wasn't right. The meals I cooked were too heavy, too old-fashioned. I was spoiling Emma by picking her up too much when she cried. Each criticism was delivered with a smile, wrapped in concern for my well-being or Emma's development, but they accumulated like tiny cuts that never quite healed. Marcus seemed oblivious to the tension growing in his own house. He'd come home exhausted from work, kiss his wife and daughter, and retreat to his home office to finish projects that couldn't wait until morning. When I tried to talk to him about some of Jessica's comments, He'd brush off my concerns with a tired smile and a promise that everything would work itself out. He trusted his wife, believed in the life they were building together, and I didn't want to be the mother who poisoned that trust with complaints that might sound petty coming from someone else. By the third year, Jessica had stopped pretending to be grateful. She'd enrolled Emma in an expensive daycare program, claiming the child needed more social interaction with kids her own age. My daily routine of caring for my granddaughter was suddenly unnecessary, but I was still expected to maintain the house, still criticized for every small thing I did differently than Jessica would have done it herself. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning in March. Emma had woken up with a fever, and the daycare wouldn't take her. Jessica had an important presentation at work that she couldn't miss, and Marcus had already left for a business trip to Seattle. I volunteered to stay home with Emma, just like I'd done countless times before. But when Jessica came home that evening, instead of thanking me, she launched into a lecture about how I'd given Emma too much children's medicine, how I should have called the pediatrician first, how I clearly didn't understand modern parenting standards. I'd been caring for sick children since before Jessica was born, but I bit my tongue and nodded along with her concerns. That night, I heard her on the phone with Marcus, telling him how worried she was about leaving Emma with someone who might not make the right medical decisions. She never mentioned that Emma's fever had broken by noon, that the little girl had spent the afternoon laughing and playing with the toys I'd bought her, that she'd eaten a full dinner and gone to bed without any fuss. Looking back now, I realize that conversation was probably when Jessica made her decision. She'd been looking for an excuse to get rid of me, and my supposed medical incompetence was the perfect justification. Over the next few weeks, she became increasingly distant, speaking to me only when necessary, making plans for the family that somehow never included me. She started talking about redecorating the guest room, about how nice it would be to have a proper home office now that Marcus was being considered for a promotion. The morning she finally confronted me, I'd been living in their house for 3 years and 2 months. I'd given up my independence, my own space, my life savings to help them get established. I'd poured my love and energy into their family, believing I was building something lasting with my son and granddaughter. I'd been naive enough to think that my contributions mattered, that my presence was valued, that blood meant something more than convenience. This arrangement just isn't working anymore, Jessica repeated, her voice steady and rehearsed. We don't have space for you here. I looked around the kitchen where I'd prepared hundreds of meals, at the living room where I'd played with Emma every afternoon, at the hallway where family photos lined the walls, photos that included me, but somehow made me feel like an outsider looking in. The house was huge by any reasonable standard, with 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, but according to Jessica, there was no space for the woman who'd helped make their comfortable life possible. Where do you expect me to go? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jessica shrugged, a gesture so casual it took my breath away. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're resourceful. Maybe one of those senior living communities would be perfect for someone your age. You could make friends, have activities planned for you. She was talking about me like I was a burden they'd finally decided to shed. Like 3 years of my life meant nothing more than an inconvenience they were ready to correct. I thought about all the times I'd held Emma when she was teething, all the meals I'd cooked when Jessica was too tired to think about dinner, all the quiet sacrifices I'd made to help their family thrive. What does Marcus think about this? I asked. Marcus agrees that it's time for us to have our privacy back, she said without hesitation.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
We're starting to think about having another baby, and we need to prepare for our growing family. Another baby. They were planning another child while throwing away the grandmother who devoted herself to the one they already had. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. I wondered if Marcus really knew about her plans, or if Jessica was speaking for both of them the way she'd started doing more and more often over the past year. When do you want me gone? I asked. Well, we don't want to rush you, Jessica said, though her tone suggested otherwise. But we're hoping to get started on the renovations soon, maybe by the end of the month. 3 weeks. She was giving me 3 weeks to dismantle the life I'd built around their family and find somewhere else to exist. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. If I opened my mouth, I might say something I'd regret, something that would give her ammunition to use against me with Marcus. I think I'll go for a walk, I said, setting down the cold tea and reaching for my jacket. That's a good idea, Jessica said brightly. Fresh air always helps clear the head. I walked for hours that day, through the manicured streets of Meadowbrook Heights where every house looked like a magazine cover and every family seemed perfect from the outside. I thought about how much money I'd spent helping Marcus and Jessica buy their dream home, money I'd saved for decades in case of emergencies or unexpected needs. I thought about the inheritance I'd been planning to leave them, the life insurance policies with their names as beneficiaries, the small investments I'd made with their future in mind. By the time I got back to the house, Marcus was home from work. He was sitting at the kitchen table with Emma on his lap, helping her color in a picture book. When he saw me, his smile was warm but tired, the same expression he'd worn since Jessica's ultimatum started weighing on him. "Mom, Jessica told me you two talked today," he said carefully. "I want you to know this isn't personal. We just think it might be better for everyone if you had your own space again." "Is this what you want, Marcus?" I asked directly. "Or is this what Jessica wants?" He looked uncomfortable, glancing toward the living room where Jessica was watching television. "It's what we both want," he said. But he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "You understand, right? We need to do what's best for our family. What's best for their family." As if I wasn't family. As if 3 years of devotion and sacrifice had earned me nothing more than a polite dismissal. I looked at Emma, who was happily scribbling purple crayon across her coloring book, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding around her. She looked up at me with those bright eyes and reached out her little arms. "Grandma Rose," she said happily, "look at my picture." I picked her up and hugged her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, memorizing the weight of her small body against mine. This was what I was losing. Not just a place to live, but daily access to the most precious thing in my world. Jessica's plan wasn't just about reclaiming space in their house. It was about removing me from Emma's life, reducing me to an occasional visitor who could be managed and controlled. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I told Emma, kissing the top of her head. "Grandma loves it very much." Over dinner that night, Jessica chattered about her plans for redecorating, about the new furniture she wanted to buy, about how excited she was to turn my room into a craft space where she could pursue her hobbies. She talked about me like I was already gone, like the past 3 years had been an inconvenience she was finally free to correct. Marcus nodded along with her enthusiasm, occasionally glancing at me with what might have been guilt or might have been relief. I excused myself early and went to my room, soon to be Jessica's craft space, then sat on the bed I'd slept in for over 3 years. I looked around at the few personal items I'd been allowed to keep, at the photos of Emma I'd framed and hung on the walls, at the small bookshelf filled with stories I'd planned to read to my granddaughter as she got older. That's when I made my decision. If Jessica wanted to treat me like I wasn't family, then I'd show her exactly what that meant. If Marcus was willing to let his wife erase me from their lives, then I'd make sure they understood the full cost of that choice. I'd spent my entire adult life putting other people's needs before my own, sacrificing my comfort and security for the people I loved. But love, I was learning, had to be mutual to mean anything. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Janet Morrison, the estate planning attorney who'd helped me update my will when I moved in with Marcus and Jessica. It was late, but I left a voicemail asking her to call me in the morning. I had some important changes to make and I wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of Marcus and Jessica getting ready for sleep in the master bedroom down the hall, I thought about the woman I used to be before I gave up everything to help them. Rose Mitchell had been independent, strong-willed, someone who didn't take disrespect from anyone. Somewhere along the way, in my eagerness to be the perfect mother and grandmother, I'd forgotten who I was outside of my usefulness to other people. It was time to remember. And it was time to make sure that Marcus and Jessica never forgot the price of taking family for granted. The next morning, Jessica was already gone when I came out for breakfast. She had an early meeting, according to the note she'd left on the counter, but I suspected she was just avoiding another awkward conversation. Marcus was getting Emma ready for daycare, struggling with her tiny sneakers the way he always did when Jessica wasn't there to help. "Let me," I said, kneeling down to tie the laces properly. "Thanks, Mom," he said, but he sounded distracted. "Listen, about yesterday." "It's fine, Marcus," I interrupted. I understand. You have to do what Jessica thinks is best. He looked at me sharply, probably hearing the edge in my voice that I hadn't quite managed to hide. That's not fair. This is a decision we made together. Of course it is, I said, standing up and smoothing down Emma's hair. Your wife has very strong opinions about what she wants, and you've always been good at supporting those opinions. Mom, I said it's fine, I repeated, forcing a smile. I'll start looking for apartments today. Maybe Jessica's right. Maybe it's time for me to make some new friends my own age. He looked relieved, probably thinking I was handling the situation better than he'd expected. If only he knew what I was really planning. I hugged Emma goodbye, promised her I'd see her later, and watched Marcus load her into the car for the drive to daycare. Then I went back inside, poured myself a cup of coffee, and called Janet Morrison. "Rose," she said warmly when her assistant put me through. "How lovely to hear from you. How are things going with the family arrangement?" "That's actually why I'm calling," I said. "I need to make some changes to my estate planning. Significant changes." There was a pause. "I see. Can you tell me what kind of changes you're thinking about?" "I want to remove Marcus and Jessica as beneficiaries from everything," I said clearly. "The life insurance, the investment accounts, the savings bonds, all of it. I want to redirect those assets to someone else." "That's certainly your right," Janet said carefully. "But this is a big decision, Rose. Are you sure you want to make these changes? Sometimes family disagreements can be worked out with time and communication." I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "This isn't a disagreement, Janet. This is a fundamental difference in how we view family obligations. They've made it very clear that I'm not welcome in their lives anymore, so I think it's only fair that they're not welcome in my will anymore." "All right," she said. "Who would you like to designate as your new beneficiary?" I'd been thinking about this all night, and the answer had come to me just before dawn. "The Children's Hospital Foundation," I said. "And I want to set up a scholarship fund in Emma's name at the community college. Money for single mothers who are trying to get an education." "That's very generous," Janet said, "and very meaningful. When would you like to come in to make these changes official?" "As soon as possible," I said. "Today, if you have time." We scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of control over my own life. Jessica and Marcus might be able to dictate where I lived and how often I saw my granddaughter, but they couldn't control what I did with the money I'd spent a lifetime earning and saving. I spent the rest of the morning looking at apartment listings online, not because I was eager to move, but because I wanted to understand my options. Most of the places I could afford were small, cramped, located in neighborhoods that weren't particularly safe for a woman my age. After 3 years of living in luxury in Meadowbrook Heights, the reality of my reduced circumstances was sobering. But as I scrolled through listing after listing of tiny studio apartments with questionable plumbing and no air conditioning, I felt my resolve strengthen. This was what Jessica expected me to accept, a dramatic reduction in my quality of life so that she could have more closet space. Well, she was welcome to her extra room. But she was going to discover that some decisions came with consequences she hadn't anticipated. Around noon, Marcus called to check on me. "How are you doing, Mom?" he asked. "I know this transition is hard." "I'm fine," I said. "I found some nice apartments to look at. One of them even has a little garden where I could grow tomatoes." "That sounds perfect," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "You always did love gardening. Maybe this will be a good change for you." "Maybe it will," I agreed. "By the way, I'm updating some paperwork today. You know how it is. When you move, you have to change your address on everything." "Of course," he said. "Do you need any help with anything?" "No, I think I can manage. I've gotten pretty good at handling things on my own." After lunch, I drove to Janet Morrison's office, a modest building in the older part of town, where the rent was reasonable and the parking was free. Janet had been practicing estate law for 30 years, and she had the kind of practical wisdom that came from watching families make both good and terrible decisions about money and inheritance. "Before we proceed," she said once I was seated in her office, "I want to make sure you understand what you're doing. You're removing your son and daughter-in-law from your will entirely. That means no inheritance, no life insurance benefit, no access to your retirement accounts. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? I'm certain, I said. They've made it clear that they don't consider me family anymore. I'm just returning the favor. Janet nodded slowly. All right. Let's go through this step by step. For the next 2 hours, we revised every document that had Marcus and Jessica's names on it. The life insurance policy worth $200,000. The investment accounts I'd built up over decades of careful saving. The savings bonds I'd purchased every year since Marcus was born, intending them as a legacy for his children. The small pension from my years at the textile factory. All of it redirected to charitable organizations that help children and families in need. There's one more thing, I said as we finished the paperwork. I want to write a letter explaining my decision, something that will be read along with the will when the time comes. That's called an ethical will, Janet said. It's a way to explain your values and reasoning to the people you're leaving behind. I think that's a wise choice. I spent another hour crafting a letter that explained exactly why I'd made my decision. I wrote about the 3 years I'd devoted to their family, about the sacrifices I'd made and the love I'd given freely. I wrote about Jessica's ultimatum and Marcus's willingness to go along with it. I wrote about what family meant to me and how disappointed I was to discover that my definition wasn't shared by the people I'd loved most. When this is all executed, Janet explained, as I signed the final documents, your new beneficiaries will receive notification that they've been included in your estate. But Marcus and Jessica won't know about these changes unless you tell them, or unless something happens to you. I understand, I said. And I want to keep it that way for now. When I left Janet's office, I felt lighter than I had in months. I'd taken back control of my life, my choices, my legacy. Jessica and Marcus could have their house to themselves, could redecorate my room however they wanted, could pretend I'd never been an important part of their lives. But they'd also given up the financial security I'd spent decades building for them. I drove home, though I supposed I couldn't call it home much longer, and found Jessica in the kitchen, cleaning out cabinets with the kind of aggressive efficiency that suggested she was excited about my departure. She looked up when I came in, her smile bright and false. "How was your day?" she asked. "Did you find any nice apartments?" "I found some options," I said. "I also took care of some other business. Updated some old paperwork that needed attention." "That's good," she said, turning back to the cabinet. "It's important to stay organized when you're making a big move." If only she knew how organized I'd become. I watched her for a moment, this woman who'd systematically erased me from her family's life, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She thought she was so clever, so in control of the situation. She had no idea that her perfectly calculated plan was about to cost her more than she'd ever imagined. "Jessica," I said quietly, "can I ask you something?" She turned around, probably expecting me to beg for more time or try to negotiate better terms for my departure. "Of course." "Do you really think this is what's best for Emma? Having her grandmother live across town, seeing her only when it's convenient for you?" For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something that might have been uncertainty cross her face. Then she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. "Emma will be fine," she said firmly. "Children are resilient. She'll adapt." "I hope you're right," I said. "I hope she doesn't spend years wondering why Grandma Rose suddenly disappeared from her life." Jessica's jaw tightened. "You're not disappearing, Rose. You're just living independently again. That's what normal families do." Normal families? As if there was anything normal about a daughter-in-law forcing her husband's mother out of their home after years of unpaid service. As if it was normal for a grandmother to be treated like hired help who'd outlived her usefulness. "You're right," I said with a smile that probably looked as fake as hers. "I'm looking forward to getting back to normal." That evening, Marcus came home with flowers for Jessica and a new picture book for Emma. He was trying so hard to be the perfect husband and father, to keep everyone happy, that he couldn't see how his efforts to please his wife were hurting his mother. Or maybe he could see it, and he'd simply decided that Jessica's happiness was more important than mine. During dinner, Jessica talked about her plans for my room again, about the craft table she wanted to buy, and the storage solutions she'd researched online. She was so excited about reclaiming the space that she didn't notice how quiet Marcus had become, or how little Emma was eating, because she was too busy looking around the table like she sensed something was wrong. "When is Grandma Rose moving to her new house?" Emma asked suddenly. Jessica and Marcus exchanged a look. They hadn't figured out how to explain my departure to a 3-year-old who'd never known life without me in it. "Soon, sweetheart," Marcus said carefully. "But you'll still see Grandma Rose. She'll just live in a different house." "Can I visit her new house?" Emma asked. "Of course you can," I said before Jessica could answer. "Grandma would love to have you visit." Jessica's smile grew strained. "We'll have to see how things work out," she said. Grandma's new house might not have space for visitors. Even now, even as she was forcing me out, she was already planning ways to limit my access to Emma. I should have been surprised, but I wasn't. This was who Jessica really was, someone who viewed relationships as transactions, who eliminated people from her life the moment they stopped being useful. "I'm sure we'll figure it out," I said pleasantly. "After all, where there's a will, there's a way." If Jessica caught the double meaning in my words, she didn't show it. She just nodded and went back to describing her craft room plans, her voice bright with anticipation for the life she'd have once I was gone. Later that night, as I packed my belongings into boxes, I found myself thinking about the letter I'd written that afternoon. In it, I'd tried to explain how much I'd loved Marcus and Jessica, how much I'd wanted to be part of their family, how deeply their rejection had hurt me. But I'd also written about disappointment, about the difference between being loved and being used, about the importance of treating family members with respect and dignity. Someday, maybe years from now, they'd read that letter and understand exactly what they'd lost when they decided I wasn't worth keeping around. They'd realize that their comfortable life had been built partly on my sacrifices, and that their financial future had been secured by my decades of careful planning and saving. But by then, it would be too late to change anything. The money would be gone, donated to causes that actually valued generosity and service. The security I'd planned to provide for Emma's future would be helping other children instead, kids whose families understood the importance of gratitude and respect. As I folded clothes into boxes and wrapped picture frames in newspaper, I thought about the woman I'd been when I first moved into this house. She'd been hopeful, eager to help, willing to sacrifice her independence for the chance to be closer to her family. That woman had been naive about Jessica's true nature, blind to the warning signs that were obvious in hindsight. But the woman I was now, the woman packing up her life in preparation for exile, she was stronger, smarter, more determined to protect her own dignity. She'd learned that love without respect was worthless, that family was about more than shared DNA, that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable someone's bad behavior. I sealed the last box with packing tape and labeled it in clear block letters, Rose Mitchell, personal items. Tomorrow I'd start the process of finding a new place to live, of rebuilding a life that didn't revolve around other people's needs and wants. It wouldn't be easy, especially at my age, but it would be mine. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was already planning the conversation I'd have with Marcus and Jessica someday, the day they discovered exactly how much their cruelty had cost them. I imagined Jessica's face when she realized that the inheritance she'd been counting on had vanished, redirected to people who actually deserved it. The thought made me smile as I turned off the light and settled into bed for one of my last nights in the house where I'd given so much and received so little in return. Change was coming, for all of us. Jessica just didn't know it yet. The apartment I eventually chose was nothing like the spacious guest room I'd called home for 3 years. Located in Riverside Gardens, a complex that had seen better decades, it was a 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor, with thin walls and a view of the parking lot. The carpet was a faded beige that showed every stain, and the kitchen appliances were harvest gold relics from the 1970s. But it was mine, and after weeks of living under Jessica's increasingly hostile glare, even this modest space felt like freedom. Moving day arrived on a gray Saturday morning in April. I'd hired 2 college students with a pickup truck to help transport my belongings, since Marcus had conveniently scheduled a golf tournament that weekend, and Jessica claimed she had a migraine that prevented her from lifting anything heavier than a coffee cup. The boys were polite and efficient, loading my boxes and furniture with the kind of careful respect I hadn't experienced in months. As we carried the last of my things out to the truck, Emma appeared in the doorway, wearing her pink pajamas and dragging her stuffed elephant. She looked confused and small, like she couldn't understand why all of Grandma Rose's things were disappearing. "Where are you going, Grandma?" she asked, wrapping her arms around my legs. I knelt down to her level, my heart breaking at the genuine bewilderment in her voice. "Grandma is going to live in a new house, sweetheart. But I'll still love you just as much, no matter where I am. Can I come with you?" she asked hopefully. Before I could answer, Jessica appeared behind her, pulling a silk robe tight around her waist. "Emma, honey, Grandma needs to go now. Say goodbye." The dismissal in her tone was unmistakable. This wasn't a temporary farewell or a promise of future visits. This was goodbye, period. I hugged Emma as tightly as I dared, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and trying to memorize the feel of her small arms around my neck. "Be good for Mommy and Daddy," I whispered. "And remember that Grandma Rose loves you more than all the stars in the sky." Jessica cleared her throat impatiently. "Emma, come inside. It's cold out here." I stood up slowly, my knees protesting after the morning of packing and lifting. Jessica was watching me with an expression that might have been satisfaction or might have been relief. Either way, it was clear she couldn't wait for me to be gone. "I guess this is it," I said, though I wasn't really talking to her. "I guess it is," she replied. "I hope you'll be happy in your new place, Rose." The false warmth in her voice was almost insulting. She hoped I'd be happy in my cramped apartment with the broken air conditioning and the neighbors who played music too loud. She hoped I'd be content with my exile from the family I'd helped build. I managed a smile that felt like swallowing glass. "I'm sure I will be," I said. Change can be very liberating. Something flickered in her eyes, but before she could respond, I turned and walked to the truck. The college boys had already climbed into the cab, waiting patiently for me to finish my goodbyes. I got into the passenger seat and didn't look back as we pulled out of the driveway. I'd said goodbye to that house the night before, walking through each room and remembering the moments of joy and sorrow I'd experienced there. Now it was time to focus on what came next. The apartment felt impossibly small when we unloaded everything. Furniture that had fit comfortably in my old room now dominated the limited space, making it difficult to navigate from the living area to the kitchen. The boys helped me arrange everything as best we could, but when they left, I stood in the middle of my new home feeling overwhelmed by how much my world had shrunk. I spent that first week settling in, learning the rhythms of my new neighborhood. The woman next door, Mrs. Chen, was a widow about my age who worked part-time at the library. She brought me homemade soup on my third day and stayed for coffee, sharing stories about the other residents and warning me which washing machines in the laundry room actually worked. It was the first genuine kindness I'd experienced in months. "You seem sad," she observed as we sat at my small kitchen table. "Big change." "You could say that," I replied. "I lived with my son's family for a few years, but it was time for me to have my own space again." Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. "Sometimes families grow apart instead of together. It's not always anyone's fault, but it's always hard." If only she knew how much fault there actually was, and how deliberately some people worked to push families apart. But I appreciated her kindness, her assumption that my situation might be natural rather than cruel. It was nice to talk to someone who didn't know the whole story, who could see me as just Rose instead of the unwanted mother-in-law who'd overstayed her welcome. The hardest part of those early days was the silence. After 3 years of Emma's laughter echoing through a busy house, after the constant activity of meals to prepare and laundry to fold and toys to pick up, my apartment felt tomb-like in its quiet. I found myself turning on the television just for background noise, though I rarely paid attention to whatever was playing. I'd been in the apartment for 2 weeks when Marcus finally called. His voice was carefully neutral, the tone he used when he was trying to avoid conflict. "Hi, Mom. How are you settling in?" "Fine," I said, though fine was a relative term. "The apartment is smaller than I expected, but it's adequate." "That's good. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about Emma. She's been asking about you a lot, and Jessica thinks it might be confusing for her if you visit too often right away. Maybe we should give her some time to adjust to the new situation. Translation. Jessica had decided that I was to be erased from Emma's life as completely as possible, and Marcus was going along with it. I gripped the phone tighter, feeling the familiar surge of anger and hurt that had become my constant companions. What exactly does too often mean, Marcus? Well, maybe once a month to start, and we'd prefer if you came here instead of having Emma visit your apartment. Jessica's concerned about the neighborhood. Once a month. I'd gone from being Emma's daily caregiver to being allowed to see her 12 times a year and only under Jessica's supervision in her territory. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. I see, I said quietly. And what does Emma think about this arrangement? Marcus was quiet for a moment. She's 3 years old, Mom. She doesn't really understand adult decisions. She'll adapt. There was that word again, adapt. As if emotional abandonment was just another childhood milestone, like learning to tie shoes or ride a bicycle. As if a little girl's confusion and grief over losing her grandmother were minor inconveniences to be managed rather than genuine trauma that deserved consideration. Of course she will, I said. Children are remarkably resilient when the adults in their lives decide to reshape their world. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder for whom? Certainly not for Jessica, who was getting everything she wanted. Not for Marcus, who was avoiding conflict by supporting his wife's decisions. The only person for whom this was hard was me, and apparently my feelings weren't worth considering. You're right, I said. I'll try to make this as easy as possible for everyone. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about the letter I'd written in Janet Morrison's office. In it, I'd explained how much I'd loved being part of Emma's daily life. How proud I'd been to help raise such a bright, affectionate little girl. I'd written about the bedtime stories and the afternoon walks, the scraped knees I'd bandaged and the tears I'd dried. I'd described what it felt like to be relegated from grandmother to occasional visitor, and how that change had crystallized my understanding of how Jessica really viewed me. The next few weeks fell into a routine of sorts. I grocery shopped at the small market down the street, where the produce was never quite as fresh as what they sold in Meadowbrook Heights, but the prices were reasonable. I found a new doctor who accepted my insurance, a cheerful woman about Emma's age, who didn't seem to think my various aches and pains were particularly alarming for someone my age. I started volunteering at the community center, helping with their literacy program for adult learners. The volunteers were a mix of retirees and young professionals, people who gave their time because they believed in helping others improve their lives. Working with them reminded me that there were still good people in the world, people who understood that families and communities were built through service and sacrifice, not just when it was convenient or beneficial. One of my students was a woman named Maria, about 40 years old, who was trying to get her GED so she could apply for a better job at the hospital where she worked in housekeeping. She had 3 children and a husband who worked construction, and she came to our sessions after 8-hour shifts that left her exhausted but determined. My kids, they see me studying, she told me one evening as we worked through a particularly challenging math problem. They understand that education is important, that you never stop learning. I want them to know that you fight for what you want, even when it's hard. Her words stayed with me long after our session ended. Here was a woman who worked physically, demanding jobs to support her family, who spent her evenings studying instead of watching television, who was investing in her future despite the obstacles in her path. She understood sacrifice and perseverance in ways that Jessica never could. It was during my 6th week at Riverside Gardens that I got the call from Janet Morrison. I was folding laundry in my tiny living room when the phone rang, and her voice was unusually formal when I answered. Rose, I have some information I thought you should know about, she said. It's regarding your previous will, the one we revised last month. What about it? Well, it seems that Marcus has been asking questions. He called my office yesterday, claiming he needed to review your estate documents for insurance purposes. Of course, I couldn't share any information with him without your permission, but I thought you should be aware that he's looking into your affairs. My stomach dropped. Did he say why? He mentioned something about making sure your new living situation was properly covered by your policies. But Rose, I've been doing this for 30 years, and in my experience, adult children don't usually start asking about inheritance unless they're concerned about something specific. I set down the towel I'd been folding, my mind racing. What had prompted Marcus to suddenly investigate my finances? Had Jessica said something that made him suspicious? Or was this just the natural next step in their campaign to control every aspect of my life? What exactly did you tell him? Nothing, of course. I explained that I couldn't discuss client information without written authorization from you. He seemed frustrated, but he didn't push the matter. After Janet hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about what Marcus's call might mean. Maybe he was genuinely concerned about my insurance coverage, worried that my new living situation created some kind of liability gap. But more likely Jessica had put him up to it. Maybe she was already planning how to spend my inheritance. Or maybe she was concerned that I might do something rash with my money now that I was living independently. Either way, her instincts weren't wrong. I had done something rash, at least from her perspective. I'd removed her and Marcus from my will entirely, redirecting my life's savings to organizations that would use the money to help people who actually needed it. The thought of her finding out too early, before I was ready for the confrontation, made my chest tight with anxiety. I called Janet back and asked her to make a note in my file that under no circumstances was anyone other than me to have access to information about my estate. She assured me that she'd already implemented those protections but agreed to add an additional security flag to prevent any confusion. That weekend, I decided to visit the Children's Hospital Foundation, one of the organizations that would eventually benefit from my revised will. I wanted to see firsthand how they used their donations, to make sure my money would truly make a difference for children who needed help. The foundation occupied a modest building near the hospital campus, and the woman who gave me a tour was clearly passionate about their work. They funded medical equipment that insurance wouldn't cover, provided temporary housing for families whose children were receiving long-term treatment, and offered educational support for kids who missed school due to illness. Every donation matters, she explained, as we walked through their family resource center. Even small gifts can have a huge impact when they're combined with others who care about helping children heal. I thought about Emma, healthy and happy and surrounded by people who could afford to give her every advantage in life. Then I thought about the children who came to this hospital, fighting battles that 3-year-olds should never have to face, supported by families who were struggling just to afford parking and cafeteria meals while their children received treatment. I've been thinking about making a significant donation, I told the tour guide, something that could create a lasting program in my granddaughter's name. Her eyes lit up. That's wonderful. Let me connect you with our development director. She can help you explore options that would create the kind of legacy you have in mind. By the time I left the foundation that afternoon, I'd met with their development director and learned about several programs that needed funding. The one that appealed to me most was a scholarship fund for single mothers who were pursuing healthcare careers while caring for children with chronic illnesses. It seemed like the perfect way to honor Emma's name while helping women who understood what it meant to sacrifice for their families. The director, a sharp woman named Dr. Patricia Williams, explained how they could structure the fund to provide ongoing support for deserving recipients. She talked about the application process, the criteria for selection, and the kind of impact that sustained funding could have on both the scholarship recipients and the patients they would eventually serve. A fund of the size you're considering could support 2 or 3 full scholarships annually, she said. That means 6 to 9 healthcare workers over the next decade, each of whom will spend their careers helping children and families. The ripple effect is extraordinary. I signed preliminary paperwork that afternoon, authorizing them to begin the process of establishing the Emma Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund. The irony of the name wasn't lost on me. Emma was very much alive, but the relationship between us was being systematically killed by her mother's selfishness and her father's weakness. When I got back to my apartment that evening, I felt more at peace than I had since the day Jessica told me I wasn't welcome in their family anymore. My money was going to do real good in the world, helping people who would appreciate the opportunity and use it to help others in turn. It was a much better legacy than anything Jessica and Marcus would have built with my inheritance. The next morning, I was surprised to find Marcus standing outside my apartment door when I went to get my mail. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot and avoiding direct eye contact. "Hi, Mom," he said. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I was in the neighborhood for work and thought I'd see how you're settling in." It was a lie, of course. There was nothing in my neighborhood that would bring an aerospace engineer to Riverside Gardens for work purposes. But I invited him in anyway, curious about what had really prompted his visit. He looked around my small apartment with the kind of careful assessment that suggested he was cataloging everything he saw. His gaze lingered on the stack of hospital foundation brochures I'd left on the kitchen counter, though he didn't comment on them directly. "The place is smaller than I expected," he said. "It's adequate for my needs," I replied. "Would you like some coffee?" We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one where I'd shared soup and conversation with Mrs. Chen. But the atmosphere now was tense, loaded with unspoken questions and unacknowledged resentments. "I called your lawyer's office last week," Marcus said finally. "I wanted to make sure your insurance policies were properly updated with your new address." "How thoughtful of you," I said. "But I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, Marcus." "I have been for quite some time." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I know that, Mom. I just wanted to make sure everything was taken care of properly. Moving can be stressful, and sometimes important details get overlooked." "Nothing has been overlooked," I assured him. "In fact, I've been reviewing all of my financial arrangements quite thoroughly lately. It's amazing how much clarity you can gain when you're not distracted by daily obligations to other people." Something in my tone must have alerted him, because his expression grew more attentive. "What do you mean?" I smiled, the same polite, meaningless smile that Jessica had perfected. "Just that I have more time now to focus on my own priorities, to think about what's really important to me, and how I want to spend my remaining years." "That's good," he said, but he sounded uncertain. "I'm glad you're looking at this as an opportunity for a fresh start." "Oh, it's definitely that," I agreed. "A chance to reevaluate everything, to make sure my time and resources are going to the people and causes that truly deserve them." We talked for another 20 minutes about inconsequential things: my new neighborhood, his work projects, Emma's progress at daycare. But I could see him processing our conversation, trying to decode the meaning behind my words. He wasn't stupid, just willfully blind when it came to his wife's manipulation. Eventually, though, even Marcus would have to acknowledge the reality of the situation they'd created. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about the different ways this story could unfold. Maybe Marcus would go home and tell Jessica about his visit, about the hospital brochures, and my comments about reevaluating priorities. Maybe Jessica would recognize the threat and try to make amends, though that seemed unlikely given her personality. More probably, they'd dismiss my words as the empty threats of a bitter old woman who couldn't accept her diminished role in their lives. Either way, it didn't matter. The wheels were already in motion. My will had been changed, my donations planned, my new life established. Jessica had gotten what she wanted: a house free of my presence and influence. But she'd also lost something she didn't even know was at stake, something that would eventually reveal the true cost of her cruelty. The following week brought the first real test of Marcus and Jessica's new visitation rules. I was invited to Emma's third birthday party, but only for the final hour, after the other guests had left and the main celebration was over. I was to arrive at 4 o'clock, stay until 5, and limit myself to one small gift. The party was being held at their house, with what seemed like half the neighborhood in attendance. Jessica had hired a professional party planner, complete with a bounce house in the backyard, and a character performer dressed as Emma's favorite cartoon princess. Through the front window, I could see children running around in elaborate costumes while their parents sipped wine and chatted in small clusters. I waited in my car until exactly 4 o'clock, watching the last of the guests leave with their party favor bags and sugar-crashed toddlers. Then I walked to the front door with my carefully chosen gift: a set of art supplies that Emma could use to create pictures for her room. Jessica answered the door wearing a sundress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile was bright and artificial, the expression of a hostess who was determined to maintain appearances no matter how she really felt about her guests. "Rose! Perfect timing. Emma's been asking about you all day." It was probably true. Emma had always been excited about birthdays and holidays, and she would naturally expect her grandmother to be part of the celebration. But she'd also been learning, gradually and painfully, that Grandma Rose wasn't part of the family in the same way anymore. I found Emma in the living room, still wearing her princess dress but looking tired from the afternoon's excitement. When she saw me, her face lit up with genuine joy, and she ran over to give me a hug that nearly knocked me over. "Grandma Rose, you came to my party!" "Of course I did, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss your birthday for anything in the world." She opened my gift with the kind of focused intensity that only small children can bring to unwrapping presents. When she saw the art supplies, she immediately wanted to try them out, so we sat on the floor and drew pictures together while Jessica cleaned up the remnants of the party. "This is for you, Grandma," Emma said, holding up a drawing that might have been a flower or might have been a dinosaur. "You can take it to your new house." "It's beautiful, honey. I'll hang it on my refrigerator so I can see it every day." "Can I see your new house?" she asked hopefully. Before I could answer, Jessica appeared beside us. "Maybe someday, Emma, but Grandma's house is very small, and it's far away from here." It wasn't far away, maybe 20 minutes by car. But I didn't correct her. I understood the message. Emma would see my apartment when Jessica decided she could, which meant probably never. The hour passed quickly, filled with Emma's chatter about her party and her new toys and her excitement about starting preschool in the fall. She was growing so fast, reaching new developmental milestones that I was no longer allowed to witness firsthand. In 6 months, she'd be a different child, with new interests and capabilities that I'd only hear about secondhand if I heard about them at all. When 5 o'clock arrived, Jessica appeared with my jacket and purse, her message clear. "Thank you so much for coming, Rose. Emma loved having you here." I hugged Emma goodbye, promising to see her again soon, even though I had no idea when that would be. As I walked to my car, I could hear Jessica already redirecting Emma's attention to something else, helping her transition away from thoughts of Grandma Rose and back to the family activities that didn't include me. Driving home to my small apartment, I thought about the conversations I'd overheard during my brief visit. The other parents talking about their children's achievements, their family vacation plans, their hopes and concerns for the future. Normal family conversations that I was no longer part of, even though I'd helped create the stability that made Jessica's comfortable life possible. That night, I called Dr. Williams at the Children's Hospital Foundation to confirm the final details of Emma's scholarship fund. The paperwork was nearly complete, and the first scholarships would be awarded within 6 months. 2 single mothers would receive full tuition support to pursue nursing degrees, with additional funding for childcare and living expenses while they completed their studies. "The selection committee was very impressed with the scope of your donation," Dr. Williams told me. "This fund will change lives, Rose. Not just for the scholarship recipients, but for all the patients they'll serve throughout their careers." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and imagined those future nurses working in pediatric wards, bringing compassion and skill to children who needed healing. I thought about the families who would benefit from their care, the mothers who would receive support and understanding from healthcare workers who knew what it meant to struggle for their children's welfare. It was a much better use of my money than anything Jessica and Marcus would have done with it. They would have used my inheritance to upgrade their house, take expensive vacations, buy luxury items that would have impressed their friends but helped no one in genuine need. My new plan would create lasting good in the world, would honor Emma's name in a way that reflected the values I'd tried to teach through my own example. The irony was perfect. Jessica had discarded me because she thought I was no longer useful to her family's advancement, but by removing me from their lives, she'd also removed them from my will, redirecting my resources to people who would use them to serve others rather than themselves. Her selfishness had ultimately cost her everything she thought she was protecting, and she didn't even know it yet. Over the next few weeks, I settled more deeply into my new routine. I increased my volunteer hours at the community center, taking on additional students who needed help with basic literacy and math skills. I joined the Riverside Gardens Book Club, where Mrs. Chen and I discovered we shared a love of mystery novels and political biographies. I started taking evening walks around the neighborhood, getting to know the local shops and restaurants that catered to working families rather than affluent suburbanites. My new life was smaller in scope, but richer in meaning. I was building relationships based on mutual respect and shared interests rather than family obligation and convenience. I was using my time and energy to help people who genuinely appreciated my efforts, rather than pouring myself into a family that took my contributions for granted. But the hardest part was still the silence where Emma's voice used to be. I missed her constant questions, her innocent observations about the world around her, her absolute trust that Grandma Rose would always be there to comfort and protect her. I missed being part of her daily discoveries, watching her personality develop and grow. Sometimes I wondered if Marcus and Jessica truly understood what they'd done to their daughter, or if they'd convinced themselves that she was better off without me. Maybe they believed their own narrative about normal families and independent living arrangements. Maybe they thought Emma would simply forget about the grandmother who had been such a central part of her early life. But children don't forget love, even when the adults around them try to erase it. Emma would grow up with questions about why Grandma Rose had disappeared from her life, why the woman who had cared for her every day suddenly became an occasional visitor. Someday she'd be old enough to understand the choices her parents had made, and she'd have to decide for herself whether those choices reflected the kind of family values she wanted to embrace. I hoped that by then, she'd also understand that her grandmother had loved her enough to ensure that her name would live on in service to others, that the Emma Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund would continue helping families long after all of us were gone. I hoped she'd see that as a more meaningful legacy than anything her parents could have built with my money. The call I'd been expecting finally came on a Tuesday evening in June. I was preparing dinner when my phone rang, and Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID. But when I answered, it was Jessica's voice that greeted me, tight with barely controlled anger. "Rose, we need to talk. Marcus is working late, so I thought it would be better if we spoke privately." "About what, Jessica?" "About the phone calls you've been making. About the organizations you've been contacting. About whatever game you think you're playing." My heart rate quickened, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't play dumb with me," she snapped. "I know you've been talking to hospitals and charities, asking about donation procedures and memorial funds. I know you think you're being clever, but you're not as smart as you think you are." So she'd been investigating my activities, probably hiring someone to follow me, or calling the organizations I'd visited to ask questions. I shouldn't have been surprised. Jessica was nothing if not thorough, and she perceived a threat to her interests. "I volunteer with a literacy program," I said calmly. "Many of my fellow volunteers are involved with various charitable organizations. It's natural that I'd learn about their work and consider getting involved myself." "Cut the act, Rose. I know what you're really doing. You're trying to manipulate us, trying to make us feel guilty for asking you to move out. Well, it's not going to work. You can threaten to give away your money to spite us, but we both know you won't actually do it." There it was, the assumption that had guided all of Jessica's behavior toward me. She believed I was too weak, too desperate for family connection, too afraid of being alone to actually follow through on any real consequences for their treatment of me. She thought my threats were empty, my independence temporary, my resolve ultimately breakable. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "I have been making donations to charitable organizations. In fact, I've already committed to funding a scholarship program at the Children's Hospital Foundation. It's going to be called the Emma Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. When Jessica finally spoke, her voice was shaking with rage. "You can't use my daughter's name for your petty revenge schemes." "It's not revenge, Jessica. It's legacy. Emma's name will help deserving mothers get the education they need to care for sick children. It's a beautiful way to honor her, don't you think?" "You're sick," she hissed. "Using a child's name to hurt her own family. Marcus was right about you. You've always been selfish and manipulative." "I'm curious," I said, ignoring her insults. "What exactly did Marcus say about me? Because in all our conversations, he's never mentioned thinking I was selfish or manipulative. Those sound more like your words than his." Another pause, this one filled with the realization that she'd revealed more than she intended. Marcus might have agreed to exclude me from their lives, but apparently he hadn't embraced Jessica's more venomous characterizations of my behavior. "The point is," she continued, her voice regaining some of its control, "this little tantrum of yours isn't going to change anything. You're still not welcome in our home. You're still going to see Emma on our terms, when we decide it's appropriate. And if you keep trying to cause problems, you won't see her at all." "I understand," I said. "And I hope you understand that my decisions about my own money and my own legacy are mine to make." Emma's scholarship fund is already established, Jessica. The paperwork is signed, the funding is committed. Whether you approve or not is irrelevant. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline and something that felt like triumph. The confrontation I'd been dreading had finally happened, and I'd survived it. More than that, I'd stood my ground, refused to be intimidated, made it clear that Jessica's bullying tactics wouldn't work on me anymore. Within an hour, Marcus called back. His voice was strained, caught between his wife's anger and his own uncertainty about how to handle the situation. "Mom, Jessica told me about your conversation. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "About this scholarship thing. She seems to think you're using Emma's name to hurt us somehow, but I know you wouldn't do anything to hurt Emma." "You're absolutely right," I said. "I would never do anything to hurt Emma. In fact, everything I've done has been with her best interests in mind." "Then can you help me understand what's going on?" "Jessica is really upset, and I'm trying to figure out how to calm this situation down." I took a deep breath, knowing that what I said next would determine the course of our relationship for years to come. "Marcus, I've established a scholarship fund in Emma's name that will help single mothers pursue healthcare careers. It's funded through my estate, which means it will provide ongoing support for deserving women long after I'm gone. I thought you'd be proud that your daughter's name would be associated with such meaningful work." "Your estate?" His voice was tight. "Mom, what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've revised my will to reflect my current priorities. The money I'd originally planned to leave to you and Jessica will instead go to organizations that help children and families in need. The scholarship fund is just one example of how my resources will be used to make a positive difference in the world." The silence stretched for so long that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You changed your will?" "I did. I thought it was important to make sure my money went to people who would use it to help others, rather than to people who might use it for purely selfish purposes." "Mom, that's a huge decision. Don't you think we should have discussed it?" "Why would we discuss it, Marcus? You've made it very clear that I'm not really part of your family anymore. Jessica told me I was never really family to begin with, so I've simply adjusted my estate planning to reflect that reality." "But Emma will benefit tremendously from the scholarship fund. Her name will be associated with helping other children, with supporting mothers who are working to improve their families' lives. It's a much more meaningful legacy than a trust fund that might have made her entitled and spoiled." I could hear him breathing heavily, probably trying to process the magnitude of what I'd told him. All those years of assuming my inheritance would secure their future, all of Jessica's calculations about my financial contributions to their lifestyle, all of their casual dismissal of my worth as a family member, it had all just evaporated in one phone conversation. "How much money are we talking about?" he asked finally. "Enough to fund 2 full scholarships annually for the next several decades," I said. "Enough to change the lives of dozens of families. Enough to make a real difference in the world." "Jesus, Mom, I had no idea you were this angry." "I'm not angry, Marcus. I'm disappointed. There's a difference. Angry people lash out and try to hurt others. Disappointed people make different choices about how to spend their time and resources. Can you change it back? I mean, if we worked things out, if Jessica apologized." The desperation in his voice was almost heartbreaking. "Almost. But not quite enough to make me forget the months of casual cruelty, the systematic erosion of my relationship with Emma, the cold calculation that had gone into my exile from their lives." "I suppose anything is possible," I said carefully. "But it would take a pretty dramatic change in circumstances to make me reconsider my current arrangements." "What kind of change?" "I thought about Emma, about the little girl who deserved better than parents who used love as a weapon and family relationships as bargaining chips. I thought about the kind of people Marcus and Jessica would need to become to earn back my trust and respect. The kind of change that would convince me you've learned something important about how families should treat each other," I said. "The kind of change that would make me believe Emma will grow up understanding that love isn't conditional on convenience." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and waited for the next phase of this drama to unfold. Jessica wouldn't give up easily, and Marcus would be caught between his wife's demands and his growing understanding of what their treatment of me had cost them. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was the one holding the cards. The game had changed, and they were finally beginning to understand the rules. The next 3 days passed without any communication from Marcus or Jessica, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were taking my revelation. Jessica was probably strategizing, trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation, while Marcus was likely caught between his wife's fury and his own growing panic about their lost inheritance. On Friday morning, Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with a concerned expression. "Rose, there's been a woman sitting in a car outside our building for the past 2 hours. She keeps looking up at the second-floor windows. Do you think we should call the building manager?" I walked to my living room window and peered through the blinds. Sure enough, Jessica's silver BMW was parked across the street, and I could see her blonde hair through the driver's side window. She was watching my apartment like a private investigator on a stakeout, probably hoping to catch me doing something she could use against me. "I know who it is," I told Mrs. Chen. "It's my former daughter-in-law. She's not dangerous, just dramatic." Mrs. Chen raised her eyebrows but didn't ask for details. After living in an apartment complex for several years, she'd probably seen her share of family disputes played out in the parking lot. I made myself a cup of tea and settled into the chair by my window, content to wait Jessica out. If she wanted to waste her Friday morning sitting in her car, that was her choice. I had volunteering at the community center that afternoon, and I wasn't about to let her surveillance operation disrupt my schedule. Around noon, Jessica finally got out of her car and walked to the building entrance. I buzzed her in when she pressed my apartment number, though I took my time walking to the door. When I opened it, she looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd been sitting in a car for hours, working herself into a state of righteous indignation. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. "By all means, come in," I said dryly, closing the door behind her. She looked around my small living space with the kind of critical assessment she'd once reserved for my housekeeping in her much larger home. I could see her cataloging the modest furniture, the second-hand decorations, the obvious signs that I was living on a fixed income rather than the comfortable retirement she'd assumed I could afford. "This is what you gave up our house for?" she asked. "This tiny apartment in this rundown complex?" "I didn't give up your house for anything, Jessica. You made it clear that I was no longer welcome there, so I found somewhere I was welcome." She turned to face me, her expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been desperation. "Okay, let's cut through all the games and manipulation. I know what you're trying to do. You think you can force us to take you back by threatening to give away your money. But it's not going to work. I'm not trying to force anyone to do anything," I said calmly. "I've simply made decisions about my own life and my own resources based on the circumstances you and Marcus created. Those circumstances being what, exactly? That we asked you to get your own place? That we wanted some privacy in our own home? That's not unreasonable, Rose. Most families don't live together the way we did." It was fascinating, listening to her rewrite history in real time. In her version of events, they'd politely asked me to consider independent living, rather than Jessica telling me there was no space for me in their lives. She'd transformed 3 years of my devoted service into some kind of imposed burden that they'd graciously tolerated. "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Most families don't live together the way we did. Most grandmothers don't give up their own homes to provide free childcare and housekeeping services. Most daughters-in-law don't tell their husbands' mothers that they were never really family." Jessica's cheeks flushed. "You're taking that comment completely out of context. What context would make it acceptable to tell someone at their own son's funeral that they're overreacting and were never really family?" The words hung in the air between us. I'd never directly confronted her about that moment before. Had never forced her to acknowledge what she'd said, while we were both grieving and vulnerable. But now, in the clear light of my small apartment, there was nowhere for her to hide from her own cruelty. "I was upset," she said finally. "We all say things we don't mean when we're emotional." "Do we? Because I've been quite emotional lately, and I haven't found myself telling anyone they weren't really family. Interesting how that particular cruelty only seems to come naturally to certain people." Jessica's jaw tightened. "Fine. I said something hurtful. I'm sorry. Are you happy?" Can we move past this now and figure out how to fix the mess you've created? Her apology was perfunctory at best, delivered with the kind of irritated impatience that suggested she thought saying the words should immediately resolve all the consequences of her actions. But some things couldn't be fixed with reluctant apologies, especially when the person apologizing clearly didn't understand what they'd done wrong. What mess do you think I've created, Jessica? You know exactly what mess. This scholarship fund nonsense, using Emma's name to spite us. Changing your will to punish Marcus for supporting his wife, instead of enabling your need to control our family. Each accusation revealed more about how Jessica viewed the situation. In her mind, I was the manipulator, the controller, the one who disrupted their perfectly reasonable desire to live without interference from unwanted family members. She couldn't see that I'd simply responded to their choices with choices of my own. The scholarship fund isn't nonsense, I said quietly. It's going to help women get the education they need to support their families. Emma's name will be associated with something meaningful and generous. I thought you'd be proud of that. I'd be proud if you'd discussed it with us first, instead of using our daughter's name as a weapon in your personal vendetta. Your daughter, I repeated. Not our granddaughter. Not the child I helped raise for 3 years. Your daughter, whose name you get to control and whose relationships you get to manage. I understand the distinction now. Jessica's expression shifted, and for a moment I saw something that might have been uncertainty. Maybe she was beginning to realize how her possessive language sounded, how completely she'd written me out of Emma's life, even in the way she talked about the child. That's not what I meant, she said, isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've been very clear about who belongs in your family and who doesn't. I'm just operating according to the boundaries you've established. Look, Jessica said, her tone becoming more businesslike. Obviously, we've had some miscommunications and hurt feelings, but we're all adults here, and we should be able to work this out rationally. What would it take for you to reconsider your estate planning decisions? There it was, the negotiation she'd really come to have. Not an apology for the months of cruelty, not a genuine attempt to repair our relationship, but a business discussion about what she'd have to give up to get my money back. That's an interesting question, I said. What are you offering? Well, you could have dinner with us every Sunday. And maybe keep Emma 1 weekend a month. When it's convenient for our schedule, we could include you in major holidays, assuming you don't try to take over the planning, or criticism how we choose to celebrate. Her proposal was revealing in its limitations. I'd go from being an integral part of Emma's daily life to being a scheduled visitor whose access was strictly controlled. I'd be included in their family events only when it suited their convenience, only as long as I didn't express opinions or preferences that conflicted with Jessica's vision of how things should be done. That's very generous, I said. 1 weekend a month and major holidays, assuming good behavior. What about Emma's birthday parties, school events, doctor's appointments when she's sick? Those are family decisions, Jessica said quickly. We need to be able to make choices about Emma's life without having to consult with extended family members about every little thing. Extended family members. 3 years of devoted grandmothering had earned me a designation, somewhere between stranger and distant relative. I was to be consulted about nothing, informed about what they chose to share, and grateful for whatever scraps of access they decided to grant. I see, I said. And in exchange for accepting this generous arrangement, I would change my will back to its original terms? Obviously, Jessica said. Family money should stay in the family. It's not right to let strangers benefit from resources that should be supporting Emma's future. But I thought I wasn't really family. The words hung between us like a challenge. Jessica's face went through a series of expressions: anger, frustration, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned irritation. You're family when you choose to act like family, she said finally. When you support our decisions and respect our boundaries instead of trying to manipulate us into doing what you want. Ah, I said. So family membership is conditional on compliance. How fascinating. And what happens if I ever disagree with one of your decisions again? Do I get expelled from the family again, or do you have some kind of 3 strikes policy? You're being ridiculous. Am I? Because it seems like you're asking me to buy my way back into a relationship where you hold all the power, make all the decisions, and I'm expected to be grateful for whatever level of access you decide to grant me. That doesn't sound like family to me, Jessica. That sounds like extortion. Her mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold anger that had been driving her behavior all along. You want to know the truth, Rose? You're right, you're not really family, you're Marcus's mother, which means we have to tolerate you to some degree, but you've never been my family. I tried to be nice about it, tried to include you and make you feel welcome, but you've always been an outsider looking in. Finally, I said. Some honesty. Thank you for that. So here's what's going to happen, she continued, her voice gaining strength as she embraced her true feelings. You're going to change your will back, and you're going to stop this ridiculous charity nonsense, or you're going to lose access to Emma completely. No weekend visits, no holiday dinners, nothing. You'll be just another old woman living alone in a shabby apartment, and your granddaughter will grow up forgetting you ever existed. The threat was delivered with the kind of vicious satisfaction that revealed Jessica's true nature. She'd been holding back her real feelings for years, playing the role of the tolerant daughter-in-law while secretly resenting every moment of my presence in her life. Now that the pretense was over, she was free to show me exactly how little my relationship with Emma meant to her. You're absolutely right about one thing, I said calmly. Emma might grow up forgetting me. Children do adapt to the circumstances adults create for them. But she won't forget the Emma Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund. Every year when new recipients are selected, they'll send her updates about the women who are pursuing healthcare careers in her name. She'll see pictures of their graduations, read letters about how their education has helped them care for sick children. Jessica's expression faltered slightly, but I continued before she could interrupt. And when Emma gets older, when she starts asking questions about why her name is associated with this scholarship program, she'll learn the whole story. She'll discover that her grandmother loved her so much that she wanted Emma's name to live on in service to others, helping families who understood the value of sacrifice and dedication. She'll learn that some people think family is about love and respect, while others think it's about control and convenience. You're threatening to poison her against us, Jessica said. I'm promising to tell her the truth, I corrected. About how much I loved her, about how hard I tried to be part of her life, and about the choices her parents made that led to our separation. When she's old enough to understand, she can decide for herself whether those choices reflected the kind of family values she wants to embrace. For the first time since she'd arrived, Jessica looked genuinely shaken. Maybe she was imagining Emma as a teenager, asking uncomfortable questions about why Grandma Rose had disappeared from her life. Maybe she was realizing that her daughter would eventually grow up and form her own opinions about her parents' decisions. You're sick, she said finally. Using a child as a weapon in your twisted revenge fantasy? I'm not using Emma as a weapon, I said. I'm ensuring that her name will be associated with something meaningful and generous. Something that reflects the values I tried to teach her during the years I was allowed to be part of her life. If that threatens you, Jessica, maybe you should think about why. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse with jerky, angry movements. This isn't over, Rose. I won't let you destroy our family with your bitterness and manipulation. Our family was destroyed the moment you decided I wasn't really part of it, I replied. I'm just making sure that destruction is complete and permanent. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a deep sense of peace. The last pretense was gone, the final negotiation had failed, and we all knew exactly where we stood. Jessica would never accept me as a true family member, would never treat me with genuine respect, would never acknowledge the value of my contributions to their lives, and I would never again allow myself to be diminished by her cruelty or manipulated by her threats. That evening, I called Dr. Williams at the Children's Hospital Foundation to confirm that all the paperwork for Emma's scholarship fund was complete and irrevocable. She assured me that the program was fully established and that the first recipients would be selected within the next few weeks. I know I've asked this before, she said, but are you absolutely certain you want to make Emma's middle name part of the official fund designation? The Emma Rose Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund has a lovely ring to it, and it honors both your granddaughter and yourself. I'm certain, I said. I want Emma to know that her middle name connects her to this program, that she carries part of her grandmother's legacy in her own name. Over the weekend, I kept expecting Marcus to call, but my phone remained silent. Either Jessica hadn't told him about our confrontation, or he was still processing what it meant for their future. By Monday morning, I realized that their silence was probably permanent. They'd made their choice, and now they would live with the consequences. I threw myself into my volunteer work with renewed energy, spending extra hours at the community center and taking on additional students who needed help with basic literacy skills. Maria, the woman working toward her GED while supporting 3 children, passed her math exam that week, and her joy was infectious. "I never thought I could do this," she told me as we reviewed her test scores. "But you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. That made all the difference." Her words reminded me why I'd chosen to redirect my inheritance toward education and healthcare. These were people who understood the value of sacrifice, who worked hard to improve their circumstances, who would use their opportunities to help others rather than simply accumulate more wealth for themselves. The first Emma Rose Mitchell Memorial Scholarship recipients were announced on a Thursday afternoon in July. Dr. Williams called to give me the news personally before the official notifications went out. "We selected 2 extraordinary women," she said. "Carmen Rodriguez is a single mother of twin boys with cystic fibrosis. She's been working as a hospital aide while taking night classes, and this scholarship will allow her to complete her nursing degree. The second recipient is Amanda Chen. Actually, I think she might be related to your neighbor. She's pursuing a degree in respiratory therapy after caring for her mother through a long battle with lung disease." I felt tears prick my eyes as Dr. Williams described the scholarship recipients' backgrounds and goals. These were women who understood loss, who'd seen suffering firsthand, who would bring both skill and compassion to their future careers. Emma's name would be forever linked with their success, and through them, with the countless patients they would care for throughout their careers. "There's one more thing," Dr. Williams continued. "We always send notification letters to the family members named in memorial funds, letting them know about the program's activities." "Should we send updates to your son and daughter-in-law?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I think they should know how Emma's name is being honored." The notification letters went out the following week. I spent that time wondering how Marcus and Jessica would react to official correspondence from the Children's Hospital Foundation, complete with Emma's full name prominently featured on the letterhead of the scholarship program. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Marcus called me on Saturday morning, his voice tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Mom, we got a letter from some hospital foundation about a scholarship fund." "Yes, the Emma Rose Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund. They're very efficient about keeping donors and family members informed about the program's progress." "Family members," he repeated slowly. They addressed the letter to Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Mitchell, parents of Emma Rose Mitchell. "They think Emma is dead." I hadn't considered that implication, but I could understand how the memorial designation might be confusing to people who didn't know the circumstances behind the fund's creation. "The scholarship is a memorial to my relationship with Emma," I explained. "Not to Emma herself. It honors the love we shared and the time we had together before circumstances changed." "Mom, this is really confusing for us. People are going to think something happened to Emma. The neighbors, her teachers, our friends. What are we supposed to tell them when they ask about this memorial fund?" For the first time since this whole situation began, Marcus sounded genuinely distressed rather than just frustrated. Maybe he was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation they'd created, the way my absence from Emma's life would require explanations that didn't reflect well on their choices. "You could tell them the truth," I suggested. "That Emma's grandmother established a scholarship fund in her honor because she loved her very much, but circumstances prevented her from being part of Emma's life anymore. That makes it sound like we're keeping you away from her. Aren't you?" The question hung between us, loaded with months of accumulated hurt and disappointment. Marcus was silent for so long that I wondered if he'd hung up. "We just wanted some space," he said finally, "some time to figure things out as a family without outside pressure." "Whose pressure, Marcus? Mine? Because I never pressured you about anything. I helped when you asked for help, stepped back when you asked for space, and supported your decisions even when they hurt me. Jessica feels like you never really accepted her, like you were always judging her parenting choices and household management. Jessica feels that way because she was looking for reasons to justify removing me from your lives, She never wanted me there, Marcus. She tolerated me when she needed my help, and she got rid of me when she decided the cost was higher than the benefit. That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me one decision Jessica made about my living situation that wasn't primarily about what was best for Jessica. Tell me one conversation she had with me that wasn't ultimately designed to make me feel unwelcome in your home. Another long silence. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was smaller, more uncertain. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. Jessica is my wife. I have to support her decisions, even when they're difficult. No, Marcus, you don't. You have to choose between supporting decisions that are harmful and cruel, or standing up for people who deserve better treatment. You've chosen to support Jessica's decisions, and that's your right. But it's also my right to respond to those decisions in ways that protect my own dignity and well-being. By giving away my inheritance, by ensuring that my life's savings go to people who will use them to help others, rather than to people who think love is conditional on compliance. Mom, please, can't we find some middle ground here? Some way to work this out that doesn't involve punishing Emma for decisions she had no part in making? It was the first time Marcus had acknowledged that Emma might be hurt by the situation, and I felt a small flicker of hope that he was finally beginning to understand the broader implications of their choices. Emma isn't being punished, I said gently. Her name is going to be associated with helping other children for decades to come. Women will receive educations in her honor, and they'll go on to care for sick children with skills they gained through Emma's scholarship program. It's a beautiful legacy, Marcus. But what about the money she could have inherited? What about her college fund, her future security? Emma will have college funding from her parents, from her other grandparents, from her own eventual earnings. She doesn't need my money to be successful. But Carmen Rodriguez and Amanda Chen, the first scholarship recipients, they needed help to achieve their dreams of caring for others. They'll use their education to make the world a little better, which seems like a more meaningful use of my resources than funding another privileged child's comfortable lifestyle. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment and thought about the conversation. Marcus was caught between his loyalty to his wife and his growing understanding of what their treatment of me had cost their family. But understanding didn't necessarily lead to action, and I wasn't going to hold my breath waiting for him to develop the courage to stand up to Jessica's control. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with a young woman I didn't recognize. She was probably in her 30s, with kind eyes and the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone juggling multiple responsibilities. "Rose, I'd like you to meet my niece Amanda," Mrs. Chen said proudly. "The one I told you about who's starting the respiratory therapy program." It took me a moment to make the connection, and then I felt my heart skip a beat. Amanda Chen? From the scholarship program? Amanda's face lit up with recognition and gratitude. "Mrs. Mitchell, I can't believe I'm meeting you. The scholarship committee told me about your granddaughter, about how much you loved her. I'm so honored that my education will be part of Emma's legacy." I invited them in for tea, and Amanda told me about her plans for her career, her hopes of working with children who had respiratory challenges, her gratitude for the opportunity to pursue her dreams without the crushing burden of debt. "I have twin boys myself," she said. "They're 8 now, and they've watched me struggle to balance work and school for years. When I graduate and start working as a respiratory therapist, they'll see that the struggle was worth it, that education can change your life if you're willing to work for it." As I listened to Amanda talk about her children and her goals, I thought about Emma, probably playing in her backyard at that very moment, surrounded by toys and opportunities that Amanda's boys could never imagine. Emma would grow up with every advantage, every comfort, every security that money could provide. But Amanda's children would grow up understanding the value of hard work, the importance of helping others, the satisfaction that comes from earning something through dedication and sacrifice. "There's one thing I wanted to ask you," Amanda said hesitantly. "The scholarship committee mentioned that Emma is still very young. I was wondering, would it be appropriate for me to write her a letter someday? When I graduate, or when I get my first job? I'd love for her to know how her scholarship program changed my life." The offer was so unexpectedly touching that I felt tears spring to my eyes. "I think that would be wonderful," I said. "I'll make sure you have a way to reach her when the time comes." After Amanda and Mrs. Chen left, I called Dr. Williams to ask about creating a more formal connection between scholarship recipients and Emma. Could they establish a tradition of graduation letters, career updates, maybe even a small ceremony where recipients could honor Emma's contribution to their success? That's a beautiful idea, Dr. Williams said. Many memorial funds struggle to maintain personal connections over time, but having ongoing communication between recipients and the honoree could make this program something truly special. I want Emma to understand that her name helped real people achieve real goals, I said. When she's old enough to appreciate it, I want her to see the faces and hear the stories of the women whose lives were changed because her grandmother loved her enough to create something lasting in her honor. That night, I sat down at my small kitchen table and wrote a letter to Emma. Not to be delivered now, while she was too young to understand, but to be given to her someday when she was old enough to make sense of everything that had happened. In the letter, I told her about our 3 years together, about the joy she'd brought to my life and the love that had grown between us. I explained why I'd moved out of her house, why her mother had decided there wasn't space for me in their family anymore, and how much that decision had hurt me. I wrote about the scholarship program I'd created in her name, about the women who would benefit from her legacy, about the children who would receive better health care because of the education her scholarship fund would provide. But mostly I wrote about love, how it should be freely given and gratefully received, how it should never be used as a weapon or a bargaining chip, how it should inspire people to be generous and kind, rather than selfish and controlling. I told her that no matter what happened between her parents and me, she would always be loved, and that her name would always be associated with helping others. I sealed the letter in an envelope marked for Emma Rose Mitchell to be opened on her 18th birthday, and added it to the file of documents I was keeping for her future. Someday, when she was old enough to understand the choices adults had made on her behalf, she'd have the opportunity to read her grandmother's side of the story. As autumn arrived, I settled more deeply into my new life. The scholarship program continued to grow, with additional donations from other families who'd heard about Emma's fund and wanted to contribute to its mission. Carmen Rodriguez sent me a photo from her first day of nursing school, her bright smile radiating the kind of hope that comes from knowing your dreams are finally within reach. I framed the photo and hung it on my refrigerator, next to the drawing Emma had made for me at her birthday party. 2 little girls, really. One who'd been given every advantage in life, and one whose mother was working to create advantages for herself and her children through education and determination. Both deserving of love and support, but only one truly understanding what those things cost. The last communication I received from Marcus and Jessica came in the form of a certified letter delivered on a cold November morning. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, informing me that I was no longer welcome on their property, and that any attempt to contact Emma directly would be considered harassment subject to legal action. The letter was signed by Jessica's attorney, not by Marcus or Jessica themselves, which told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly they decided to erase me from their lives. There would be no more awkward phone calls, no more tense negotiations, no more false hope that we might find some way to coexist as a family. I filed the letter away with Emma's birthday drawing and the scholarship documents, evidence of a relationship that had meant everything to me and nothing to them. Then I called Dr. Williams to make one final addition to Emma's scholarship fund, a provision that Emma herself could apply for funding if she ever chose to pursue a career in healthcare or social service. That's very generous, Dr. Williams said. But are you sure, given the circumstances with her parents? I'm sure, I said. Emma might grow up believing her parents' version of this story, but she might also grow up asking questions they can't answer. If she ever decides she wants to honor her grandmother's memory by helping others, she should have that opportunity. Winter settled over Riverside Gardens with the kind of quiet determination that comes with acceptance of changed circumstances. I volunteered at the community center, read books from the library, shared meals with Mrs. Chen and her circle of friends. It wasn't the life I'd planned or the family situation I'd hoped for, but it was mine, built on principles I could respect, and relationships based on mutual appreciation rather than obligation. Sometimes, walking through my neighborhood in the early evening, I'd see other grandmothers pushing strollers, or playing with toddlers at the small playground near the community center. I'd feel a familiar ache in my chest, missing Emma's laughter and her endless questions about the world around her. But the ache was bearable now, softened by the knowledge that my love for her had been transformed into something larger and more lasting than our interrupted relationship. The Emma Rose Mitchell Memorial Scholarship Fund would continue long after all of us were gone, helping women pursue careers dedicated to caring for others. Emma's name would be spoken with gratitude, by scholarship recipients, by their children, by the patients they would eventually serve. Her legacy would be one of generosity and compassion, values her grandmother had tried to teach through example, even when those lessons weren't welcomed by the adults around her. It wasn't the ending I'd wanted for our story, but it was an ending I could live with. Love, I'd learned, wasn't always returned in the way you hoped or expected. But that didn't make it less valuable or less powerful. Sometimes the most loving thing you could do was ensure that your love lived on in service to others, even when the people you'd loved most couldn't appreciate the gift you were giving them. And someday, maybe Emma would understand that too. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.